Live on YouTube. Yeah. Now we are live on YouTube. היי גילה.
איך את קופצת ממסך למסך, גילה? זה משהו.
לא ידעתי
I
שאני...
just speak English because there are other people here who doesn't understand Hebrew.
You're springing from this side of the screen to the other side of the screen. You look good. I'm happy to say.
למה אני לא שומעת חזק?
תגביר את הרמקול במחשב.
עשיתי את זה.
אצלי נשמע טוב.
הנה, אני עכשיו שומעת אותך טוב. So, few minutes. Hi, Geshe.
Hi. Wait, let me just check something. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't know why. Ah, okay. Now I know. Okay. I couldn't succeed to do the recording. Okay. Now it's okay. Sorry.
Right.
You can start.
No, it's okay. No problem. Just a sec. For some reason, my headset doesn't work. Just a sec. I'm just going to sign out again and sign back in.
Okay.
Just a sec. Okay. Can you hear me? Great.
You are now a co-host, so you can
Okay, good.
continue.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Are you going to just play the prayers? Yeah. Okay, good. Then the rest, I'll do the rest. Okay. Thank you. So let's start with some breathing meditation, as usual. Just be in the present, focus on your breath. And then visualize that you're in the presence of the Buddha who appears in the space in front of you. Remembering that this is not mere make-believe, since the Buddha's mind is everywhere. Able to manifest in the form of a fully ordained monk. Seated on an open lotus, sun and a moon disk. Wearing the robes of a fully ordained monk. Serving not only as an object of refuge by teaching the methods to overcome suffering, but also pointing out our own resultant Buddha, our future state of Buddhahood. We all have the potential to reach and then think that you're so surrounded by all sentient beings. Especially with those you have a hard time with, you dislike, try to avoid, right in front of you. And remember what we all have in common. On a very profound level. How we all share the same potential to become fully enlightened. And we instinctively want to be satisfied and don't want to suffer. And that our differences are completely superficial. And then generate affectionate love towards each and every sentient being. Feeling of sincere closeness, of acceptance, and a deep sense of care. And then pay extra attention to all the unwanted experiences sentient beings constantly have. And based on that, generate great compassion. The wish for them to be free from all these unwanted experiences and their causes. And the wish to help them to overcome those. Try to really feel that from the depth of your heart. May I be able to protect sentient beings from all their suffering and its causes. And then allow that wish, that aspiration to grow stronger and give way to the altruistic intention. That is the determination driven by deep inner strength and a sense of joy. And courage. Determined to do whatever is necessary to help sentient beings overcome suffering and its causes. And in order to accomplish that, let's generate the mind of enlightenment.
Can you put the prayers on the screen? Let's take refuge together. Geshe will probably join us soon. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Do we have 7 link prayers for bodhicitta?
If someone have bodhicitta, so please share because I don't have it in this computer. Valda, do you have it?
Meanwhile, till we have it on screen, let's just meditate until Geshe.
Yeah, she asked to continue meditate.
It's good.
Hi, Deshima.
Sorry. We had a huge landslide, I just found out. There are a lot of problems with the rain, and so the internet comes and goes. So apparently at the circumambulation of His Holiness's palace, there's like a road kind of disappeared and all the lines are gone. But hopefully it works better now.
Wow.
For that. Did you do the prayers?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you. Okay, wonderful. So let's see. I hope it won't collapse again. I don't know, you may have heard that there are problems all over Himachal Pradesh. We had a lot of rain. In some areas it's really serious. So we were lucky actually. Okay, so I'll start. Oh no, first I'll start with the Lamrim. Where's the Lamrim? Just a sec. All right. The Lamrim outlines. Okay. So we got to suffering. And without going into suffering today, one thing I wanted to stress is part of the Lamrim that we do every week. What is really important is that you connect it with what we're studying, in the sense that understanding that all our trouble, all the unwanted experiences we have, of course, have their origin, have their cause in our misperception. And so we now try to understand, well, the opposite of the object that our misperception holds on to, which is inherent existence. So we're struggling and struggling and struggling, many of us for years, to try to first understand what is meant, what does Nagarjuna talk about, and then of course to then bring it closer to our own life, to apply it to our own life. And for that, the Lamrim paves the road, if you like. So to remember, the reason we reflected on precious human rebirth is to understand that this life, we have this unique opportunity that is extremely rare. We don't know whether we'll get it again in the future, and so not to waste time. But also to bring in death, to understand that our precious opportunity could be over at any time. And we don't know where we're going to go after our death. If it's the lower realms, well, very difficult to continue with our understanding, with our study, our reflection on emptiness. Then, of course, we take refuge. It's important to take refuge, therefore, which means basically taking refuge in the Dharma, practicing the Dharma. So when we find ourselves in challenging situations, taking refuge in the Dharma. Where's the solution to my problem? Found in the teachings of the Buddha. And also when life is going well, what can I do to apply the Dharma? And what can I do, most importantly, to apply the Dharma of emptiness? And then, of course, also consider karma. Karma in terms of the different causes that give rise to certain results. And here in particular, to accumulate enough merit, which again paves the road towards understanding emptiness. So accumulate or perform certain actions, virtuous actions, not harming others, instead benefiting others, and so forth. So to always bring it back to emptiness in that way. And then with suffering, of course, to remember our existence, however positive our situation seems right now, it's in the nature of suffering, that these experiences of even happiness, of what we call happiness and satisfaction, they're actually just a temporary release of something worse. Okay, so in that way, I don't want to spend that much time because it took a while to reconnect. So anyway, in that way also to continue to meditate on suffering, but to relate it back to what you study here, to always make that connection. All right, and then I was asked to answer some questions. There's some questions from Jimmy. I won't have time to answer all of them. So the first one here, it's all about duality, but duality needs to be explained. And before I get to duality, I'll just want to address what he asks here in this first question. When he says, we say that the cause and effect relationship is not established within the objects, between the apple seed and apple tree. Well, first of all, what is meant with cause and effect relationship? An inherent cause and effect relationship? Well, that is not established anywhere. But a conventional cause and effect relationship, of course, is established within the object. If it's the relationship between an apple seed and an apple tree, like the apple seed being a cause and the apple tree being the result. That relationship is established based on the apple seed and the tree. But of course, we need to remember it's just labeled. We say relationship. Based on what do we label relationship? Well, on the fact that an apple seed, when all the other conditions are there, as one of the main causes, the apple seed gives rise to an apple tree. So without an apple seed, an apple tree wouldn't grow. Without other causes and conditions, it couldn't grow. So the causes and conditions that assist the apple seed in its transformation to slowly turn into, an apple tree sprout and so forth, all the way up to the apple tree. So that relationship, on that basis of an apple seed slowly transforming moment by moment with the aid of other conditions, warmth and so forth, becoming an apple tree, on the basis of that we label cause and effect. And because there's this relationship in that the apple tree depends on the apple seed in order for it to grow, it needs to be preceded by the apple seed. If all the causes and conditions come together in the form of the apple seed and others, then you have an apple tree. So based on that, we say relationship. So where is it stored? Stored, like, where does it exist? I mean, stored is a kind of odd term, I guess, in that context, but it depends on the apple seed, the apple tree, the causal relationship of those two objects. So then in the consciousness of an individual person here, there you have a causal relationship of a different kind, of certain states of minds that give rise to certain experiences in the continuum of one person or one continuum of a person. So in that case, karma and its effect, so cause and effect in terms of a karmic cause and a karmic effect, well, that of course exists in dependence on that mind. But again, it's merely labeled on the basis of the fact that certain actions, virtuous actions, for instance, give rise to certain positive experiences. It's just labeled on the basis of that. And so here it's stored in the consciousness. I mean, that what is stored in the actually, when we say cause and effect relationship, that's not stored anywhere. That is just what is labeled on the basis of this connection between the acting mind, the volitionally acting mind, and the experiencing mind. But then, of course, every time there's an action, there's a karmic action, it leaves something in our mind. It changes our mind altogether. And that is described, that which changes it is described as a karmic seed. So when the action has been completed, of course, any type of action is always controlled by the mind. Well, unless it's a reflex, but here we're not talking about reflexes, we're talking about volitional actions. So volitional actions, after they've been completed, they leave something behind in their mind, which is, again, the label we use to say that now there's a potential for a certain experience. So we call that an imprint, and we call that stored in the mind, like a seed in the mind. So it's really just labeled on the basis of these changes that took place because of the karmic action. And so, so they are with this mind until other conditions come together for this karmic experience to ripen. So certain other causes and conditions come about, and then for whatever reason, then the karma may ripen. So does the individual's consciousness at death dissolve into the collective subconsciousness of society? Well, there is no collective subconsciousness of society. I mean, it depends again what is meant with collective. We use terms such as collective karma. But that is sometimes misunderstood. It's just labeled on the basis of us having similar experiences. I mean, just the fact that right now we're studying together the fundamental wisdom. So here we have a collective karma. We have a similar karma. It's not the same, can't be the same. We have different experiences while we study this text together. However, there's similarity. So that way we label collective karma. And all women in this world have the collective karma to be female. And all men in this world have the collective karma to be male, and so forth. So we all have collective karma with some people that we have something in common with. Right? So having certain experiences that are similar, we label collective karma. So if collective subconscious here in that way means that we all have a subconscious, well, then we can say, yeah, there's a collective subconscious in the sense that we all have a subconscious mind. But it's not like one big mind that our karmic imprints dissolve into. No, our continuum continues as its own continuum, and then there's other people's continuum. And in that way, there are a lot of similarity. So we have something in common here, but it's not one mind. And it doesn't arise from there again to become another individual person. We label individual person because there's a different mental stream, the karmic causes of which are only experienced by that stream of consciousness, on the basis of which we label person, of course. And so, therefore, there are on a conventional level individual people. But of course, we can also say we're a society. I mean, of course, because we share what we share, the characteristic of being human, for instance, or of being sentient beings. So we're the society of sentient beings, but still different people, different beings. And so is it possible that society is dreaming that it is an individual? No, conventionally, we are individuals that are part of society, I would say. But to always remember that it's merely labeled. I mean, we're studying fundamental wisdom, so let's always remember that phenomena are labeled, and let's check what could that basis be, the basis for labeling this, that, and the other. Okay, so I won't continue with the rest of the questions. I'll do it next time. But I want to get into something I prepared for this class. Let me just move it over a little bit so I can still see all of you and also show you this handout. Can everyone see it? Yep. Okay, great. All right. So why did I prepare this? Well, simply because in the context of what we study now, it's important to understand these three activities. It's just helpful to understand them. It's helpful to understand cause and effect in general, to get a sense of that continuum, of that continuation of everything that is impermanent. It's just a continuum of which they're continuums that are made of different moments, and these moments are described as each other's causes, giving rise to effects. I mean, it's each other's. No, I shouldn't use that. No, it's not each other's. It's like one moment being the cause of a later moment, and that later moment being the cause of the next moment, and so forth. So that accounts for this change. The change can only take place if earlier moments act as the causes of later moments. Okay. So this idea is extremely important. Is stressed again and again to understand this continuous change of, well, impermanence in that sense, subtle
I post the material on the WhatsApp group. So if someone is not in the WhatsApp and he wants me to send it to him, so he can email me or send him his mail or phone, and I can send it to him. All the material for the course.
Delete, are all the materials also on the Google Drive?
Now, in the end of the week, I will take all the papers that she sent to me, the PDF and everything, and I will take it up to
Okay,
the Drive.
thank you.
I need to do some the organization there because there is so many PDF papers, models and everything. So I want to do it by date and by numbers and everything, that it will be easier. Katom.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dalit.
You're welcome. Yes. Merav, no problem. I'm writing you the number. Yeah. If someone doesn't have a phone number or doesn't like to be in the WhatsApp, so like others do, you can email me and I will make a list who is not in the WhatsApp, and I will send the material before the course or the link for the YouTube.
Sorry for that. Keeps happening.
No problem.
Okay. All right.
As
Let
long
me
as
just
you
go
are on
back.
high grounds.
Can you hear me?
I say
Yes.
as long as you are on high grounds.
Yes, yes, I am.
You are co-host, so no problem. You can share
Great,
again.
thank you.
your material.
Ah, okay, good. So can you see the handout again? Yep. All right. Okay, so on the basis of these different changes, we talk about arising, we talk about abiding, and we talk about ceasing. That gives us a really good sense of what is happening in each moment. And arising being so important in this context. Oh, what I was just saying before the internet collapsed. So what I was just saying, think of an activity as moments in time. For instance, when you're walking, there are different moments when you lift your foot, when you raise it, when you move it forwards, you place it on the ground, and so forth. So it consists of moments in time, and labeled on these different positions of your foot, we label walking. So similarly here, arising, abiding, and ceasing is labeled on different aspects, different moments in time. Here, for instance, taking the classic example that's always used. So you can, of course, use other examples, but if we become very familiar with this example, it's just a matter of then transferring it to other objects. So whether the mind, whether situations, it works exactly in the same way. But this is an easier example. So you've got 4 moments of a seed and then 4 moments of a sprout. Okay. So here in this, it's pretty straightforward. The first moment of the seed, it has arisen. That's really important. That first moment is not arising, because to arise means it's not there yet. And I'm stressing this because that's important for the next verse we're going to start today. Hopefully today, if we make it with a shaky internet. So here you've got the sprout. You've got the seed, and that has arisen. In order for that first moment to exist, it has arisen. So that's the first moment. What is arising right now? The second moment. It is arising in the sense that these moments of the first seed, they are slowly changing to become the second moment. So these moments of the first the first moment, of course, consists of other moments. It's just a rough kind of way of saying first moment, but that consists of many, many different moments in between. And then the second moment, that also consists of many sub moments. Anyway, so this first moment, it has arisen, has come into existence. But the second moment is only arising, because this first moment is the cause of the second moment. And during the first moment, the second moment is growing, is coming into existence, is arising without being there yet. And then during the second moment, it has arisen. It's there. It's there. It has arisen. It's existent. It has come into existence, in other words. Okay. And at the same time, that first moment is also abiding. That first moment, it has arisen and it is abiding. It's there for some time. Although it consists of sub-moments that are constantly changing, but still it can be called first moment, because let's say the first moment, we determine the first moment is 1 minute long, 1 minute. So if we then say, yes, it consists of sub-moments, it consists of seconds, 60 seconds, but they're all part of that 1 minute, which is why we label it this first moment. That's part of, each moment is part of that first moment that consists of 60 seconds, or that is 1 minute long. So based on that, we can say it's abiding. Continuous, we can continue to call it this entity that is part of this first moment. But it's also ceasing. ceasing. It's ceasing in the sense that it is changing moment by moment. That moment itself is changing moment by moment. And in order for that second moment to arise, during that second moment, the first moment must have ceased. It must have gone out of existence. So during the second moment, the first moment has ceased. And in order for it to have ceased during the second moment, it must be ceasing right now. So you see that these activities, any kind of past tense, for instance, during the second moment, the first moment has ceased. So if it has ceased at that second moment, there must have been a time when it was ceasing, and that was during the first moment. Okay, so in that way, in each moment, these activities take place. However, of course, in dependence on their earlier moments and their later moments. Okay, Sneh, you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to clarify, Geshe-ma. So you're saying in that 1 minute, let's say that 1 minute is the duration of the first moment of the seed. Within that, we can divide it up and call different portions of that 1 minute the abiding and the ceasing before the second moment of the seed arises.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, if you have that one moment, you can again subdivide it endlessly, of course, because you don't just have seconds, you have nanoseconds, and you can go on endlessly. And then you have, for each moment, you have arising, you have ceasing, you have abiding, right? But here it's just from the perspective of that 1 minute, that one first moment that is 1 minute long. So just looking at it from that perspective, that one minute seed, it is arise, it has arisen, of course it's there, it's abiding, right? Because it's all part of this one moment. So we can always call it one moment, that first moment, right? We can describe it as that first moment. So it's a little hard to put it into words, but it's like each moment is labeled. It's similar enough to each other, these sub moments of the first moment, that we can call it a part of the first moment. If these moments were different here, I mean, like here, there are more of these differences are more obvious. So between in here, I mean, we don't really have any labels for those. They're all called sprouts, right? But if you take these 4 moments taken all together, all these 4 moments together, you would say they're abiding. Although they're different from moment to moment, but you can say all these 4 moments are abiding because in each moment, the defining characteristics are such that we call it sprout, right? For these 4 moments, you can also talk about these 4 moments together and say they're abiding. So for each moment, I mean, even 4 moments, they form a moment in themselves, because the moment can be as long as we want it to be. So if you take these 4 moments together and you speak of one moment, then that one moment is also abiding, because these moments are similar enough for them to call them seed, right? So in that sense, they're abiding. And even as an impermanent phenomenon, they're abiding as an impermanent phenomenon. So they're there, but that's just from one perspective. From another perspective, they have arisen in that previously they were coming into existence. Now they've come into existence. Now they're there. Now they have come into existence. But they're also ceasing, because from moment to moment, they're different. They're moving closer to their own destruction, their own non-existence on one hand, but also changing moment by moment. It's that process of changing moment by moment that is described as ceasing. So changing moment by moment is the same as ceasing. I cannot say it properly. Ceasing moment by moment. Ceasing moment by moment and changing moment by moment mean the same. It being imperfect. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please, Geshe-ma, please finish.
No, it's okay.
I think that's where I was getting confused before with the idea of subtle impermanence being moment to moment change. And then how can that accommodate abiding and ceasing? But but what you're saying is that that moment to moment change, we can call it whatever we want. So the second, within the first moment, we can divide it up, and we can call that first moment as it's changing, abiding and ceasing.
Yes, this is like arising, abiding, and ceasing are labeled on the basis of different aspects, right? Different aspects. So taking the first moment, having arisen, having come into existence, have a moment earlier having not existed, and now having come into existence, we say it has arisen. We label has arisen. Okay. The second moment we label during the first moment, we say it's arising on the based on the fact that later on it arises. Later on it arises, and right now its cause exists during the first moment. So we can label the second moment is arising. So let's remember, it's all labeled. It's just labeled. There is no inherent arising. That's what I'm trying to stress. So we call that, we say of the first, during the first seed, we say the second moment is arising. There's no second moment yet, but we could still label second moment is arising. Then for the first moment, we can also say it's abiding. It's not from the point of view that it has come into existence. It's not from the point of view that it goes out of existence, but it's from the point of view that while it's there, although it's changing, we can label it as that first moment. We describe it as that first moment because although it consists of all these sub-moments, these moments are similar enough that I can call it part of that first moment, right? And at the same time, it's ceasing because it's moving towards its own destruction. So from that perspective, moving towards its second moment or moving towards its own destruction, when the second moment has arisen, we label it ceasing. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is very helpful. Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Okay, you're welcome. So it's a little complicated. I have a hard time to explain it, but just take yourself as a continuum, as a person. Yourself, you think of yourself. So it's always helpful to bring it, well, to apply it to something closer to yourself. Like it's a seed, it's a pot, it's a sprout. How close is that to me? But to me as a person, to think of myself as a person, I have arisen. Yes, I have arisen from my parents, from my previous life. From my previous life, that has given rise to me. I didn't exist as the person I'm right now. But the causes for my existence right now, well, because they were arising in the past, in my previous life, now I have arisen as this person. So I'm there. At the same time, I'm abiding. Which means each moment is similar enough so that I can be called Kelsang Wangmo. From the day I was born until I die, although Kelsang Wangmo, the name was given to me much later when I became a nun, but still, it doesn't have to, the label doesn't have to be applied at the same time. It can also be labeled like even the first Dalai Lama, for instance. He was only called the first Dalai Lama after when the third Dalai Lama was alive. So during the first Dalai Lama, he wasn't even called that, and still we refer to him as the first Dalai Lama now. Therefore, with regard to myself, so I'm called Kelsang Wangmo, and you can describe myself, I can talk of myself from the day I was born to the day I die. So although I'm changing moment by moment, the similarities are there, they're enough to be called Kelsang Wangmo. If then I'm born as a cow, my next life will be called something else. And then moving on to ceasing. Ceasing is important. Ceasing is important because that points out that yes, I'm there, and yes, I'm there as Kelsang Wangmo, but I'm changing all the time. My earlier moments give rise to my next moment, give rise to my next moments. And in that way, the ceasing, that stresses the fact that I'm impermanent. Okay? So from those from those perspectives, from these different perspectives, I can see that arising takes place. In my case, I mean, I have arisen as this person, but I'm also, what is arising right now? My future me. My future me is arising right now. Although my future me is not there yet, but I'm creating the causes for the future me. I'm there, I'm similar enough to be called Kelsang Wangmo, so I'm abiding and I'm ceasing. Does that make sense? Okay, so I just wanted to stress that because we keep talking about the lack of inherent existence of arising, and that's so abstract. We're so familiar with tables and other objects, but what is so unique about Nagarjuna's text is that he doesn't just talk about the I, he doesn't just talk about tables and cars and so forth, objects that we usually take apart when we think about emptiness, but he uses so many different ideas and concepts in different situations. So here it's arising, coming into existence, because for anything impermanent to be there, it has to first arise. And so the discussion that we're going to go through now deals with exactly that. So let's just remember again, having arisen is merely labeled on the fact that a moment earlier, the thing that has arisen wasn't there, but was caused at the time when it wasn't there, and now the thing is there. On the basis of that, we say arising, having arisen. Arising, we label on the fact that something is not there yet. So for instance, during this moment, the second moment, during the first moment, the second moment is not there yet. So on the basis of the fact that at this moment, during the first moment, the second moment is not there yet, but this causing the second moment, which then arises a moment later. On the basis of that, on the basis of all that, we say during the first moment, the second moment is arising. Okay, all right. Now let's move to the text, to the material for today, because that's the third verse. Oops, where are we? Okay. Here we are, the third verse. Okay. Now remember, in the previous verse,
We can't
some
see.
non-Prasangika.
We can't see.
You can't see it?
We still
Oh,
see
please
the last
share
one.
screen.
Oh, wait.
No, you're on the share screen,
Okay.
just you have to choose something else.
I have to choose something else. Okay, I'll do that.
Take it down or close it and then open the, oh, okay, now it's okay.
You can see it. Okay, great. Now, remember, in the previous verse, the non-Buddhist, the non-Prasangika Buddhist philosophers, Vaibhashika, Satantrika, Chittamatra, and Svatantrika, they are arguing, well, the Buddha taught 4 conditions implied in that teachings. And of course, 4 conditions, you remember, it includes all other causes, all other conditions, whatever, they're all included in these 4 conditions, even though there's some differences when it comes to the different philosophers, their assertions, what it means to be a condition. But leaving that aside, the non-Prasangikas, they say the Buddha taught that phenomena arise inherently because they arise from the 4 conditions. So it's implied in that. Now, in response to that assertion, now Nagarjuna indirectly answers. So he indirectly answers, he says, so this is the translation from Ocean of Reasoning, but an alternative translation that I would prefer is this one. So either you use the first one, but I'm just going to read the second one. The nature of a thing does not exist in its conditions. So the actual nature, the entity of the thing does not exist in its conditions and so forth, or etc. Does not exist in its conditions, etc. If the thing itself does not exist, something different does not exist either. That is his answer. That doesn't mean anything on first reading it, but Well, then it's explained. So this verse rebuts the Buddhist assertion indicated in verse 2 that is contrary to the Prasangika Madhyamika tenet. Why? Because it refutes the arising from something different. So by way of just refuting arising from something different in verse number 3, he's answering, and it'll become clear later on. But anyway, he's answering, he's responding, or he answers, he presents his own response to the assertion by these non-Prasangika philosophers. So what does he say? Well, first of all, what's important, and this is all taken from Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, just in the form of a summary. What is important, and I've said that before, the view of arising from something different. Of course, it refers to arising from something inherently different, actually includes two views. That a result inherently arises from its cause, and that a result and its cause are inherently different. So let's just move away from this abstract. What did I say? Arising is just labeled. Being different is just labeled. Okay, you and I being different is labeled on the basis of certain aspects of you and I appearing to the mind differently. We label different. Okay, as an example. Or, as I said, arising, something arises from its cause. A result arises from its cause. It's not there yet, but because a moment later is there, we label it arises. But here, when we describe arising, when we describe being different, because we have these tendencies to hold on to inherent existence, the better we understand these concepts, the more they seem to be very concrete, substantial, and inherently existent. Right? I mean, like before you met Buddhism, something being one and different, for instance, it didn't mean anything. I mean, we don't talk like this. Are these two one, or are they different? Right? What else? All these concepts such as arising, ceasing, what else? Arising, ceasing, and abiding. We don't talk like that. But of course, before we learn about emptiness, before we learn about the ultimate truth, the conventional truth is described. And we learn about these abstract ideas. And later on, well, initially when we learn about these ideas, they seem so concrete. We understand them better and better. We can delineate them really clearly. And based on that delineation, there's a sense it's truly there. It's inherently there. There's some arising in that result. It can actually be found. If you just search for it, you can find it. That is the sense in our mind. Does that make sense? I mean, just from your own experience, when you think about these concepts that initially, before you learn about Buddhism, they don't mean anything. But the more you learn about them, the clearer your understanding through definitions, through examples. So what was previously abstract makes so much more sense. But what creeps in is our natural sense that the thing exists in and of itself. And so no surprise, these Buddhist philosophers, the non-Prasangika philosophers who were very familiar with these ideas of arising and ceasing and so forth, and different, not different, etc., cause, effect, for them, these were very inherently there. Very inherently, existed from their own side. And so now the Prasangika school, having learned all this, we're now trying to understand that doesn't make any sense. It's merely labeled. Okay, so this is what Nagarjuna does. With this verse, he's now rejecting both views. He's refuting both views. Not only that a result inherently arises from its cause, but also that a result and its cause are inherently different, because those are both part of the view of arising from something different. Okay, we just call it in English and Tibetan, it's just called arising from the, it includes both views of inherent existence. Okay. So Nagarjuna rejects these two views by arguing that the nature or entity of a thing, such as a sprout, does not exist in or at the time of its causes and conditions. Doesn't make any sense to us right now. So don't be discouraged. Later on, that is explained. If the thing itself, that is the sprout, does not exist in or at the time of these causes, inherently existing arising from something that is inherently different from the sprout, does not exist either. Okay, as I said, it doesn't mean anything right now. It's probably easier to go through the two types of negations. And trust me, just to write this down, it took me 4 days. I never take that long for this explanation, but it's really extensive in the commentary, so long. And it goes here and there and everywhere. And it was just so hard to put it in words. So it's just as difficult for me to explain it to you now. So don't be surprised that it's difficult to understand. But once you've read it through a few times, I'm pretty sure it becomes easier. So with these words, and before the root text is not clear yet, so let's just leave it for the time being. With these words, Nagarjuna negates both, that a result inherently arises from its causes and that a result and its cause are inherently different. So the refutation of a result inherently arising from its cause. Now here in Tibetan, you have the word in Sanskrit and in Tibetan, you have this word in, but in is actually, it's not really in, it's more on, which doesn't make any sense in English, right? Based on, in, it's really hard to translate it. So here it's a little difficult in terms of, yeah, well, how would I translate it? But anyway, most commentaries, they use the word in. So I'll just use the word in. The word in that is mentioned in the second line of the third verse does not exist in its conditions, indicates the seventh, the locative case. That's just in terms of grammar. Okay, so I've got a little note here. Tibetan grammar is based on Sanskrit grammar, which is why both Sanskrit and Tibetan have 8 cases. Okay, so it's really complicated. Grammar is quite complicated. But anyway, in both the Sanskrit and Tibetan version of the third verse of the fundamental wisdom, the locative is used to indicate the basis where something exists and the time when it exists. Okay, so here the word in refers to the basis where something exists and the time when it exists. All right. Now, what did the text say? That the sprout does not exist in its conditions. The entity of the sprout or the sprout itself does not exist in its conditions. Of course, we know that. How would it? The sprout only exists later. So neither is it based on its conditions, nor does it exist at the time of the conditions. All right, so Nagarjuna argues that a result such as a sprout does not inherently rise because the nature or essence of the sprout does not exist in its causes and conditions, as if it were, for instance, a piece of fruit that is supported by the bowl in which it sits. So he's saying the sprout is not like a piece of fruit that exists in its cause. So we'd be like, so what? Of course it doesn't. How does that prove that it doesn't exist, doesn't inherently arise from its cause? Well, we'll come to that. So first it's just saying, let's be sure in no way does the result exist in its causes, in its conditions, at the time of its conditions. It just doesn't. So the sprout doesn't exist in its causes and conditions. And this is just citing citing the commentaries because they're stressed very much. So the sprout doesn't exist in its causes and conditions because it doesn't exist in them collectively, doesn't exist in all of them. It doesn't exist in them individually, and it doesn't exist in any other phenomenon, as indicated by the word etc. in the second line, that occurs at the same time as its causes and conditions. So again, he's saying the sprout does not exist in any way somewhere on or in its causes and conditions. So why? Why am I saying this? Why is the text saying this? This reasoning is based on the fact that if a result, such as a sprout, were to arise objectively and from its own side, so now the argument is hypothetically, if a result such as a sprout were to arise objectively from its own side, that is, if a sprout were to arise inherently, as it seems to us, as the lower schools would assert, the activity of arising and what arises, the sprout, would have to exist at the same time. If they existed, if arising existed inherently, if there were inherent arising, the activity of arising and what arises, the sprout, would have to exist at the same time. For it would not make sense if at the time of the inherently existing arising, that which arises didn't exist, right? If it inherently existed, what would that actually mean? I mean, it's so hard to imagine. I mean, of course, we hold on to it, but when we try to hypothetically get a sense of what inherent existence means, of course, we encounter all these contradictions, because it actually doesn't make sense. But if it were to exist at the same time, you would have a rising. You can't just have a rising on its own. I mean, a rising doesn't make sense. A rising of something. So a rising of the sprout. So at the time when you have a rising, you must have the sprout. The activity of inherently existent arising of the sprout could not exist without the object on which it is based, namely the sprout. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? That they have to exist at the same time. Also, the activity of arising and the sprout existed objectively and from their own side. So here the argument is arising is based on something. And if it exists inherently, when there's the arising, you must have that which arises. But also, if the activity of arising and the sprout existed objectively and from their own side, so if they existed, if that activity existed inherently, the arising of the sprout and the sprout would have to be one entity. They would have to be the same. Because inherently existent phenomena would not depend on entities other than themselves. Remember, if something exists inherently, it doesn't depend on anything. If there is inherent arising, it doesn't depend on anything other than itself. But then if you say there is a rising of an object, right? So it doesn't make sense to talk of just arising. I mean, inherently existent arising, there's a rising of something. So even if we accept, if hypothetically we accept, we say, okay, inherent existence is there. Phenomena exist inherently. But then this arising doesn't make sense without the arising of something. So the arising of the sprout. If the arising doesn't depend on anything other than itself, then the sprout has to be the same, has to be an entity, has to be together with it. Because otherwise, if it existed as something separate, and it would still depend on it, the arising of the sprout actually depends on the sprout, otherwise there couldn't be any arising, then the two have to be the same. So the arising and the sprout, they have to be the same, and therefore exist simultaneously. Can you raise your hand if that didn't make sense? If that doesn't make sense to you, I'm just checking. I don't see any hand. Okay. All right. I hope that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I hope it makes sense. So this reasoning is therefore based on the fact that, pardon?
I just said that
Is anyone?
I need to think about it still because it's a new material. So,
Yeah. No, of course you need to think about it. Hopefully with this explanation now and with the material, it makes sense after some time. But this is, an extremely important argument that they have to exist at the same time. So just to get a sense, because it's not merely labeled. Okay, let me just go through it a little bit further, and then it makes maybe more sense in terms of if it's merely labeled, that doesn't have to be the case. Because that's the main difficulty here. Why, when phenomena exist inherently, do arising and that which arises have to exist at the same time? While if they don't exist inherently, if arising is merely labeled, that is not the case. I think that's the difficulty here. Okay. I think the second argument, that if arising were to exist inherently and it cannot be separated from the arising of, in this case, the sprout, then they have to exist at the same time because they would be the same. Because something that exists inherently, such as arising, if it existed inherently, it would have to be, it could only depend on itself. It couldn't depend on something other than itself. Which then would mean that the arising and the sprout would be the same. And thus they would exist simultaneously. That's one argument here, but in the first case here, of course, saying arising is based on something, and unless that something is there, why would you talk of arising? Anyway, so these are the two reasons that are not totally separate, really. However, this is not tenable. It doesn't make sense that they exist at the same time. It doesn't make sense that the sprout and the arising are one entity. Why? Because the sprout doesn't exist prior to having arisen. So as we saw in that chart, the sprout only exists when it has arisen. It doesn't exist prior to having arisen. But what precedes having arisen, arising? So first comes arising and then comes having arisen. Therefore, the sprout doesn't exist prior to having arisen. As mentioned above, at the time of its causes and conditions, the sprout hasn't arisen because it has not yet come into existence. At that time, the sprout is arising, since its causes and conditions are producing it. Okay, so let's not forget, causes and conditions producing something is also just labeled based on the fact. So you have always these two aspects, always two, if not more, for any situation. So when a sprout arises, you have something that gives rise to the arising. So in other words, the causes and conditions. We talk about the causes and conditions. So in this case, the seed and the other conditions such as warmth and water and so forth. We label on the basis of the fact that while the causes and conditions are there, there's no sprout yet, but a moment later there's a sprout. On the basis of that, we label, and of course, also on the moments of the causes and conditions changing all the times. So just get this mental image, because I can't make another chart right now. I don't have another chart, but just think of these causes and conditions. Think of the seed. It is changing, it is transforming with the help of fertilizer, soil, warmth, and so forth. So all these are changing. They're changing moment by moment. And then at some point, the seed is no longer called a seed. Now it is called a sprout. So on that basis, think at the time when the seed is still called a seed, but it's changing all the time. It's transforming. On the basis of these changes, and on the basis of the fact that a moment later, the seed is now called a sprout, we label causes and conditions are producing the sprout, while the sprout is not there yet, right? It's on the basis of all these, it's even labeled on the basis of a future event. While the causes and conditions are producing the sprout is not yet there yet. But we label it as in dependence on the fact that later on the sprout will be there, and on the fact that the causes and conditions are slowly transforming while they still exist, that we label causes and conditions are producing the sprout. So that is the aspect of the causes. Now we have an activity. This is the activity of the causes and conditions in relation to the sprout. But then there's also an activity that the sprout that is assigned to the sprout, although the sprout is not there yet. But based on the fact that in dependence on the causes and conditions changing and the sprout being there later, we label the sprout as arising, right? Because it's the object that is produced. So to ignore the object that is produced in dependence on causes and conditions doesn't make sense. So there's an activity also given, or an activity is labeled on the basis of the sprout. Now, again, if you're not Buddhist, that seems so weird because we don't ascribe activities such as these to phenomena, right? Okay, arising is fine, but producing and I don't know, there are all these different activities that are ascribed. A vase performs the function of holding water, right? Remember that when you studied the topic of collected, the collected topics, what Dutta. At that time, we learned that a vase performs the function of holding water. It's almost like you've got this vase holding its own belly and kind of trying to keep it together. We have that sense of like a person or like a living being. But no, of course, that's just an activity that doesn't have to be governed by a mind or anything. It's just labeled on certain parts of it that we label performs the function of holding water in the case of the vase. Well, here we have causes and conditions that are necessary for a moment, for the sprout a moment later to arise. On the basis of that, in relation to causes and conditions, we're saying during the time of the causes and conditions, when the sprout is not there yet, we say the causes and conditions are producing the sprout, and we say the sprout is arising. Right? So it's just labeled. If it wasn't just labeled, if it was inherently so, at the time of arising, you better have the object that arises as well, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. It's not just labeled, right? Okay. So anyway, this means that at the time when the sprout has not yet arisen, but is about to come into existence, is the time of its arising. The time when it has come into existence is the time when it has arisen. Does that make sense? So you have these different times. Time of the cause, time of its arising, time when it has arisen. Therefore, if the sprout were to exist at the same time as it arises, it would absurdly follow that it already existed when it is about to come into existence. Now, some of you may think, what do I care about sprouts? And what do I care about seeds? What are we doing here? Taking apart something that is, I mean, just plant a seed and be done with it, right? Okay, well, that is the part that probably takes some time to seem interesting. I mean, how can we understand emptiness without taking apart the object, the emptiness of which we want to understand? We have to take it apart. I mean, if you meditate on emptiness of the eye, you probably spend, if you do it on a regular basis, you probably spend hours take apart the self, right? Again and again, taking it apart. Where's the self? Where's the I? To then search for it and understand that based on these parts, the I is merely labeled, and get a sense to be satisfied with that. That's all there is. You don't need anything more than that. To understand, to not just be satisfied with it, but also understand that due to it being merely labeled, the I can function. It can actually exist. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. The way we know our I as like doing this, performing this action, benefiting, harming, acting in a virtuous way, a non-virtuous way, all that is only possible if it's merely labeled on the basis of its parts. So all this we need to understand. First of all, we need to understand that it cannot be found among its parts. And then we need to understand that it's labeled on the basis of these parts. And understand that therefore it's fully functioning, otherwise it wouldn't function. So there are different steps we have to go through. And however boring that may seem, taking apart a sprout and a seed, I mean, like, and not just the sprout, that's one thing. I mean, that could biologically be really interesting. but the rising of it, I mean, what is this? But anyway, to describe the changes and so forth, we have to talk about the rising. To talk about how it comes into existence, a rising is an important concept. However, it's merely labeled. And if it existed inherently, then we'd have a problem. Okay, yes, please. Vada, you raised your hand.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And my question is like this, that like before I started to study, I saw a sprout, I saw the seed, I saw a sprout coming out, everything was fine.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm,
Now I find that actually I have to leave aside my trying to grasp visually or any other way than through my mind and consciousness, the idea of a seed turning into or producing a sprout. And that only by direct perception, maybe I will be able to see the exact interchange between the two. The till
mhm.
then, there's no, because I'm visually oriented, I always look to see what I understand. And
Mhm. Okay.
now I thought that maybe it's a waste of time. That it's not
Okay.
really something that will help me understand now.
Okay. So a visual image doesn't help you to understand producing and arising. Is that what you're saying?
I don't get, I can't see it. You can't see actually.
Oh, you can't see it. That's right.
Actually.
That's right. Yeah, you can't see producing. You can't see arising. No, it's true. So there's no visual image. No, that's true. Unless you write producing. If you have these moments of the seed, then on these moments, like let's take the biological, if you had like an image of how the seed changes moment by moment, right? Because in my image here, the seed looks the same from moment to moment. But if you could see biologically what is changing in the cells and so forth. So if you imagine that image from, I don't know, from 1 to 5, you have 5 moments or 4 moments, whatever. From 1 to 5, you have these 5 moments and the seed is changing. You can see the changes. And then the 6th moment, you have the sprout. Now the seed has changed to such a degree that is no longer called a seed. That's also important because it was never, it's not a seed from its own side. It's not a sprout from its own side. But conventionally, we have agreed that these first 5 moments are called seed and the 6th moment is called sprout. And on the basis of these conventions and on the basis of the seed during those 5 moments undergoing change, that then leads to the 6th moment, which is now called sprout. On that basis, we label producing.
I have no problem.
Right? But you can't, yeah, you can't picture it because producing is not doesn't have a shape or color, of course. Right? So there are a lot of objects that you can't depict. I mean, mine can't be depicted because it doesn't have shape and color. And so likewise, yeah, unfortunately, the producing, it's not something you can depict, except you write produce underneath it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyway, does that help a little bit, Varda?
Yes, I thought of that even when I see now something that I called before a seed and the sprout comes out, and even the part of the seed that was before and the sprout, I can see them. They are not the seed and the sprout that we are
Do we see?
the labeled ones, because then the seed will have another name from the time that it's a real seed without a sprout, the real sprout that we are seeing. Oh, anyway, complicated.
Okay. All right. Anyway, okay. So, well, I guess we all have to think about it. little bit more. I mean, this is only the beginning of the first chapter, and it starts off with something that's quite difficult, but the rest, of course, continues to elaborate on this. Anyway, so this means that the time when the sprout is not yet arisen, but it's about to come into existence, is the time of its arising. The time when it has come into existence is the time when it has arisen. Therefore, if the sprout were to exist at the same time as it arises, it would have certainly followed that it already existed. Okay, I read that. Furthermore, a result such as a sprout cannot exist simultaneously with its causes and conditions, because the following activities of a cause and its result occur at the same time. We had that also in the during the study of entering into the middle way. We also went through these activities. The following activities of a cause and its result occur at the same time. A cause ceases at the same time as its result arises, and a cause having ceased and its result having arisen exist at the same time. So especially the second part here, something having ceased and its result having arisen. Well, since they exist at the same time, a cause doesn't exist at the time of its result because it has ceased at that time. So anyway, I added this little note here, which I want to read before we finish. I'm sorry, I didn't do a meditation today because I wanted to first go through it. And then next time, I'll be sure that we go through a meditation. Also, I kept thinking that the line will asked to Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me just go back to the. Okay. So the word to cease. So disintegrate also has the connotation of falling apart, but that's not what it means. To perish, yeah, well, perish is probably closer, but actually it means to go out of existence or to come to an end. That's what it means, jigba. It is used for impermanent phenomena and is equivalent to the terms to change and to be impermanent. So to cease, to change, and to be impermanent mean the same. They're equivalent. But even though they're equivalent or synonymous, doesn't mean they don't have different meanings. Okay, so the meaning of to be impermanent, of course, is to change every moment. And now, what do we apply the term cease to, and what do we apply the term to change to? Okay, so for example, a seed changes from moment to moment because each moment of a seed is different from its previous and its next moment. So based on that, we say a seed changes because the previous moment is not the same as the next and so forth. So on that basis, we apply the word changes. Likewise, a seed ceases moment by moment because for a later moment of a seed to arise, its earlier moment must have ceased. For example, the first moment of a seed ceases while it exists. Then when it has given way to the second moment of the seed, the first moment has ceased. That is, it no longer exists. It no longer exists. Therefore, during the first moment of the seed, the first moment has arisen and is ceasing, while the second moment of the seed is arising. Then during the second moment of the seed, the second moment has arisen, while the first moment of the seed has ceased. This is really, I wrote this footnote before I did the chart. So actually, it's basically repetitive. It's in the chart already. But it gives you hopefully more of a sense what that ceasing means, and that something has ceased at the time of its result. If you get this idea, this concept, then all you need to do is now apply it to every moment in time. And if every moment can be divided endlessly, if you understand that every moment can be divided endlessly, and each moment goes through these activities of arising and so forth, it's also helpful in terms of understanding that it lacks inherent existence, because you can take it apart and and you don't actually find a real arising or real ceasing and so forth, because it's also just labeled on even smaller parts, and again labeled on even smaller parts and so forth. So to reflect on this in terms of your own continuum in smaller moments and so forth, moments in time, etc., gives you a good sense of your own impermanence. And then apply it to situations, of course, to apply it to everything. Even forgetting about emptiness, it's just so helpful in terms of not holding on to phenomena, not grasping onto this and that. So from that perspective, it's extremely helpful. But going back to emptiness, of course, that is also extremely helpful, that these are merely labeled, ceasing, etc., are merely labeled, and they don't exist in and of themselves. And if they did, the arising and the object would have to exist at the same time. And having ceased, I mean, you can take it further. I mean, this is not mentioned here, but having ceased, the result having ceased at the time of its the cause having ceased at the time of its result, well, again, the having ceased would exist. The cause would exist at the time of its result, because at the time of its result, it has ceased. And what has ceased? The cause, right? And so in that way, you could argue that cause and effect have to exist at the same time if arising or ceasing were to exist inherently. Okay. Anyway, time is up. As I said, I didn't do any meditation today. I'm sorry, I'm also a little bit distracted because I keep looking. I connected my internet now to my phone, then I have to check my phone every now and then and see that it's all working. So today it wasn't a smooth class at all, but it was the first class of that type. So hopefully next time the rains won't be as bad. So let's just spend the last 2 minutes dedicating whatever positive potential we have accumulated today to think about emptiness in that slightly unusual way in terms of rising, ceasing, and so forth. So, of course, may this become a cause for us to attain the enlightened state of a Buddha, to become fully enlightened, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of countless, endless suffering sentient beings, so that we're able to lead these sentient beings to the state of liberation and enlightenment. And in order to be able to accomplish that, we need our great spiritual masters. So may our positive potential, may that cause our masters, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all other great realized masters, to have a long, long, healthy life.
Through the merit of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land as cycled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious body mine, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born of no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain paradise. Christ, you're the source of good and happiness, powerful Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you. Goodbye.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Dalit.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Besides.